morning. Thank you all so much for being here on an important day in Memphis history, an important day for our country, and in our fight to preserve the democracy that we believe in. It is humbling to have the King family here in Memphis, as well as to have an amazing leader, Ms. Rucker, here as well. And we know that our United States Congressman Steve Cohen wanted to be here and was called into some very important work of this country, but he sends his regrets, but also his determination for justice to happen in our nation. Listen, our democracy is in peril, because our institutions are not working for the benefit of people in our country who need them the most. The abuse of power that we have witnessed by the United States Supreme Court has enshrined injustice and codified the erosion of our democracy, which proves a tragic reality that, yes, indeed, our democracy is in peril. And yet the people are told to follow the law. Laws that are written unjustly by CEOs, the National Rifle Association, big oil and gas companies, and billionaires, and state houses and Congress. And yet we are told we must follow the law. Laws that have usurped our democracy by allowing the endless amount of campaign contributions to buy politicians instead of the people choosing who they elect. And yet we're told that we have to follow the law. Laws that have too often taken away the rights to vote, propelled partisan gerrymandering to a new and dangerous height, and yet we are told that we must follow these unjust laws. And when people of conscience challenge unjust laws at the Supreme Court, too often racist, vile, and evil laws are being given ascension without intentional focus on preserving the rule of law and preserving the beliefs we hold dear about our government, our way of life, and our democracy. The Supreme Court is not apolitical. It is now a political branch of government that is too often doing the will not of the rule of law, but the rule of mob mentality. We saw senators hold the court hostage during President Obama's years of service, while they changed the shape of the judiciary under another president's tenure. What does this mean for people of goodwill and of good conscience who seek to have a moral imagination that is inclusive and that is rooted in the best of who we are? It means that the institution must be changed, and the people who are in power that are promoting the status quo must go. A status quo where billionaires are buying justices. A status quo where billionaires are able to determine who sits on the Supreme Court and how they decide what the law means. And yet we are told to follow these unjust laws. This is immoral, and we must never relent in going to the courts and demanding justice, because this is our democracy. We must never give up our hope for changing this country and the Supreme Court for the better, because that is our inheritance. We must never concede our view of freedom, of liberty, and of justice for all, because we truly mean it. We mean it for the immigrant. We mean it for women. We mean it for black folks and indigenous folks and for communities of color and for poor folks and for disabled folks and for queer folks and for discriminated against folks. We mean it. And there are people who are being put in positions of power who do not mean it and only mean it for our harm through the decisions that they make. But we mean what we believe, and we're going to continue to show up across this city, across this county, across this country to make our beliefs clear. That the Supreme Court must change to be an ethical institution, because it is what we need in this moment, and is what we deserve as a people and deserve as a nation. And I'm so glad to be with some sojourners on that movement of justice who care deeply about what our institutions do, because they understand the ramifications of them. And one of those is the great Mr. Martin Luther King, who is the chair of the Drum Major Institute, and who I'm just so grateful to be able to introduce. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Justice Pearson, Representative Pearson. Maybe we do need to look at making you justice. In all seriousness, it is, I always come to Memphis with mixed emotions, obviously. 55 years ago, in April, my father, as you know, was gunned down here. And so we come because it's critically important. It's a critically important time in our nation's history. Let me say, my wife, daughter, and I are pleased to join Representative Pearson and, of course, Ms. Rucker. And this is really about putting in the consciousness of people the prospect that we need a more just and fair Supreme Court. For those who believe that the Supreme Court is constitutionally set, untrue. There have been 13 members of the court at one point. So this will not be the first time that a court has been expanded. For those who believe that the court is doing just fine, think about history, because it is said that a people that do not remember their history are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. What do I mean by that? The history of all people, but certainly of African Americans. We often, and many of us, have gone to the court to expand rights. In 2022, there was a decision called the Dobbs decision, which retracted and moved rights backward. The right to choose, women's rights. The court, I don't believe, at least in recent times, had ever gone backward. But that's just one thing, because they also had been looking, before they did that, they decimated the Voting Rights Act in 2013. So again, a retraction as opposed to an expansion. People have always felt they could go to the courts for relief. But yet, the courts have taken a serious turn. And of course, as Justice Pearson just talked about, we are seeing justices who seem to be up for sale or can be purchased. And what we are seeing is probably just the tip of the iceberg, by the way. The Supreme Court regulates the lower courts, but they have no rules for themselves. How hypocritical is that? The standard should be at least on an equal level. And so we are here today. In this year, we are, by the way, this is the 60th anniversary of when my father delivered his very profound message entitled, "I Have a Dream." And he shared his vision for our nation and the world. And there are some who would say that that dream has become a nightmare. It certainly has for poor people. It certainly has for black people. It certainly has for Native American or indigenous people. The question is, what are we as a society going to do about it? That's why we are here to talk about the expansion of the Supreme Court. That's why over 40 organizations, and there will be many more before this is done, are going to be engaged. That's why it's going to be important for young people to engage in voting, because a voteless people is a powerless people. And one of the most important steps that we must take is that short step to the ballot box. And so, Justice Pearson, we are proud of you, and Justice Jones and other colleagues who are working with you for what you're doing here in the state of Tennessee. But it is being heard around the nation and the world. Young people have always really been involved in leadership. Most of our movements, Dad was 27, 28 when he led Montgomery, around the age you are. And so I know that it takes a few, my mom and dad showed us, good women and men to bring about change. It's not always the masses, although the masses benefit. But it's a few, those few who are willing to stand up. Stand up for justice, stand up for truth, stand up for righteousness. And so that's the vein we're here in today, and we'll be traveling to another 15 or so communities because justice is on the line.
That's right. That's right.
Now let me present my life and what my life partner and my wife and the president of the Drum Major Institute, and probably most importantly to us, the parents of an amazing young daughter, Yolanda Renee, but my wife, Arndrea Waters King.
Good afternoon. You know, Martin has already talked about the heaviness in which we stand here before you. It is a heaviness for our family to be here in Memphis. This is the place that Martin lost his father as well as his siblings. It's the place where our daughter, the only grandchild of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King, lost her grandfather. And we are also here at a point in time in which all of the work that he and Coretta Scott King and so many others dedicated their lives for are literally being eroded in front of our very eyes. I am here first and foremost, though, as a mother, a concerned mother for not only my child, but all children, because we are looking at the first generation since the end of Reconstruction and the beginning of the passage of the Black Codes that have progressively lost rights since the days that they were born. Our daughter was born in 2008. In 2013, when she was starting kindergarten, she and her peers, the Voting Rights Act, as we know it, the crowning achievement of the civil rights movement, was basically decimated. And although we have something positive to celebrate yesterday, that does not erase the tearing down of something that was built on the backs and sacrifices. It was built by the blood of our ancestors. Okay. Then let's fast forward to 2020 in our home state of Georgia. Georgia was one of those states that passed some of the most regressive, draconian voting rights, voting laws that actually were making it harder to vote. This is in her home state. Also, in 2020, diversity, equity, and inclusion was outlawed in our state of Georgia. So now history is no longer being taught in Georgia and all over the nation. And then last year in 2022, as a female, she lost rights as it relates to her own body and health care. So a girl child that was born last year or this year actually is born with fewer rights than her parents, her grandparents, and her great-grandparents. And we know in this movement that democracy is about expansion. Democracy is not about special rights. Democracy is about the right to exist. And if we no longer have that right, if we don't have the recourse to stand and to stand for peace, for justice, and equity, what we are seeing, again, is the erosion of democracy. You know, many years ago, I worked for an organization that was called the National Anti-Klan Network. That organization was started by Reverend C.T. Vivian and Ann Braden. And in 1979, you had neo-Nazis and Klan leaders that gunned down in broad daylight 8 anti-Klan demonstrators. And because of that, this organization was started. But in 1983, it changed its name from the National Anti-Klan Network to the Center for Democratic Renewal, because what we were saying was that the very mission of the Klan and neo-Nazis was the erosion of democracy. Now, when I was monitoring these groups and we were researching, the things that we are now seeing as laws and that are being codified were the philosophies of neo-Nazis and white supremacists. So we are now in 2023 at a point where oppression is being legislated. And what we are standing today together is to say that we're standing for a time that love and justice is legislated. And so we know that right now it might look impossible, but it always looks impossible until it is done. Because in the very same city that Martin Luther King Jr. was struck down, God put Justin Pearson and Tequila Rucker. So we know that laws should lift us all up. We know that peace and justice and equity in the final end will have the final say. And we do know that today, the day of the dreamer has come. Thank you very much. And now I have the wonderful honor to bring up our daughter, an activist in her own right, a rising 10th grader, the only grandchild of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King, but I like to say that being Martin Luther King's grandchild maybe open doors for her, but then she kicks them in when she gets there. So may I present to you Miss Yolanda Renee King.
Good afternoon, or good morning. I would first like to begin my remarks by reflecting, because right now we are in Memphis, Tennessee. And Memphis is a very reflective spot for my family and I. Because 55 years ago, they tried to not only assassinate my grandfather, but his dream. And so I would, at this point, also like to give thanks to my grandmother, Coretta Scott King, who kept the dream and revived the dream. So may we all give her an applause. As my mom has said, I, who was born in 2008, have recently lost my rights instead of gained rights. And children who have been born during the time span of these last 2 years have been born with less rights than I have. And a lot of times, people may I speak to the youth because people think and believe that youth doesn't have power. But my challenge to you is, if youth doesn't have power, why are they going into schools right now and restricting them? Why are kids born with less rights right now? And if you look at many of these major movements, they were led by young people. The civil rights movement, for instance, was led by most of the leaders were in their 20s. My grandfather himself began when he was in his late 20s. And high schoolers around my age, and even younger than me, with kids in elementary school, participated in the movement. And so did college kids, which is why I myself and my peers who look like me are able to now sit at lunch counters. And so I think that it is so important that we need to expand our rights. And I always like to bring up my grandfather, because when he was gone, even though they attempted to kill the dream, he left a blueprint. a blueprint which my grandmother furthermore expanded. And so now it is our challenge, and it is going to be challenging for us to build this new building. And a few days ago, I asked my parents, while looking at everything that has been happening in Washington and with politics and really all over the U.S. with the rise of restricted laws being proposed and passed, and I think we were specifically talking around what is going on in Florida. I asked her, how come all this is happening right now? Are we going to win? Do you think that we are going to win? And while history has proven that we will eventually win, it feels that when you are right in the gutter, right in the belly of the beast, that it feels like you're not going to win. And then later around today, we discussed this and how it takes a fight and how you have to earn it. And as my grandmother said, every generation has to earn their freedom. And I thought to myself, from what my mom and what my grandmother said today, that that freedom is like a room. When you have a room, and in a few days I actually have to do my annual summer clean of my room. And so when you clean the room, it's not clean right away. In fact, it's dirty. You have to, and sometimes you can't see all the dirt. It's almost camouflage. And so right now I feel like we're seeing all the dirt, all the gunk that there really was in this country. And for so many years, a lot of it was in camouflage right now. So we're finally seeing it. And it's not delightful. I mean, my least favorite part is when my room is the messiest, or when your house or when your room is a mess. That's the part that everyone dreads. But then eventually, when you take it out and when you clean and when you vacuum and when you get rid of old clothes, then the room is cleaner than it has ever been. And so finally, I would like to close my remarks by also sharing to you my inspirations, because I think that especially during this time when they are trying to restrict our history, that we must also acknowledge those who inspire us. And many times I look up to the black women, so my grandmother, my mother, and I always am thrilled when there is youth involved in this. And so now I would like to also close by introducing another powerful black lady. I would like to introduce to you Miss Tequila Rooker. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'm sorry. Okay. My name is Tequila Rucker, and I serve as the political director for Memphis for All. In these uncertain times where our democracy is under attack, it's crucial that we take the necessary steps to defend our constitutional rights before they are dismantled. Recent developments, such as the overturning of Roe v. Wade, reminds us that our fundamental rights are being attacked.
That's right.
Roe v. Wade was a landmark. It was a decision protecting reproductive rights, and that was overturned by a 6-3 vote. This decision has a far-reaching consequence for women across the nation. Right here in Tennessee, we witnessed the immediate impact of the ruling of the implementation of a trigger ban. Tennessee became one of the first states to enforce a near-total abortion ban as a result of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. It is clear that the composition of the Supreme Court and the decision it renders have a profound impact on our lives. Another example is the Affordable Care Act, which has been under attack 3 times already, with the first vote narrowly decided by a 5-4 margin. This means that a single justice's vote can make all the difference in whether millions of Americans can have access to vital health care. These are clear examples of how the Supreme Court's Composition influences our lives continually and significantly. We cannot continue to underestimate the power of corrupt, partisan Supreme Courts that embolden states to pass laws that gut our voting rights, strips power away from voters, and give guns more rights than children. Currently, these are the decisions being made by 9 individuals who hold tremendous power over the lives of millions of Americans. This concentration of power erodes the principle of justice and equality that our Constitution upholds, which ultimately threatens our democracy. To protect our rights, ensure fairness and integrity in the highest judicial system, we must consider expanding the number of justices. By expanding the court, we can save democracy and mitigate the risk of losing more of our constitutional rights. The Supreme Court plays a vital role in upholding the constitutional structure and addressing issues that affect our lives every day. It's time we restore the balance of power and reinvigorate the court's ability to advance justice and equality. Our Constitution grants Congress the authority to check the Supreme Court's power, including the authority to change its size. Today, we stand united in our call for reform so that the promise of a just and equitable society can be a reality for every American. We invite you to join us in a call to restore balance in the Supreme Court. Thank you. And now we have Representative Justin J. Pearson.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much. We're going to open it up for some questions, but to echo some amazing points, particularly made by Yolanda King. Movements are powered by black women. Movements are powered by black women, led by black women, sustained by black women. If it had not been for the black women of the movement for civil rights in this country and for human rights in this country, we wouldn't be here. And so it is so important that we listen to black women. And it is imperative that we realize we've only had one black woman on the Supreme Court to date in the history of our country. One. All that they have contributed and done to build this nation. And have only had one to date. And so to these extraordinary black women, to the black women in my life, my fiance, my mommy, my campaign manager, our team pretty much all black women. That's why we be winning. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we look forward to any questions you might have. Go ahead, Bill. Yeah, Milligan. Yeah, I think when you look at somebody's behavior, you don't look at just one thing they do. You look over the long term, what have they been doing? How have they been treating folk? How have they been interpreting the law? And if we look at the way that the law has been interpreted for too long and consistently under this court, it has been to reduce people's rights. Now, that isn't to say we aren't happy about what happened, right? We are glad that some portion, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act remained intact, right? That is a good thing. But it is terrifying that all of us lived in trepidation and fear that that wouldn't happen because of the way that this court acts and the way that they have behaved over these past several years. And so it being such a political branch that is impacting disproportionately black folks and African Americans and people who've been marginalized and oppressed in such a substantial way is concerning. And we have to look at what reforms happen to ensure that we get equitable outcomes that are representative of what our democracy needs in order to survive. Anything y'all want to add? Okay. Other questions? Yeah. Yep. We know that there need to be ethics reform at the Supreme Court. There is no reason that billionaires should be having the ability to buy Supreme Court justices' houses and vacations. Having a political agenda funded by billionaires that's impacting the laws that impact all 330 million of us is wrong. It is immoral and it is unjust. And as Mr. King mentioned, you have lower courts who have ethics rules that they follow. So why wouldn't the highest court have ethics rules that they follow?
And one thing that
Come on.
always that we talk about as well is that no one is above the law, including the highest court of law.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
This,
You got something? I'm sorry, Mama, go ahead.
oh, I was just getting ready to say that this country was built in this iteration with checks and balances, and we're not seeing that operated correctly.
That's right. That's right.
Just reminds me, you really have, the problem is that you can't regulate yourself, none of us. If hopefully we intend to do the right thing, but that's why you need some other entity that helps to regulate. There's a decision that occurred in Congress some years ago, before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court opened the door for unlimited access for corporate money.
That's it.
And I'm trying to remember the case, but it's something that needs, Citizens United. That needs to be addressed. It was the court who said, oh, yeah, I mean, how do you compete as an individual, any of us, with somebody who can provide billions of dollars and not miss it? That is unfair. We should all have the same level of access. But because you have more money, your access shouldn't be larger. There should be some regulation. So we got to remember the courts allowed for Citizens United. So how then do we expect them to regulate themselves? We just got to move to a higher level. Got to move to higher ground. Okay. Well, I believe there's a bill, and I don't want to call the name because I will get that incorrect, that has been proposed by members of Congress. I'm sure Representative Cohen was one of those who signed on to that bill. I was in Houston with Representative Sheila Jackson-Lee just a few days ago, last week, and we're going to be in North Carolina Tuesday. But my point is, I believe that one is saying at least 12, but that has to be discussed. I mean, it has to be thoroughly looked at. You can't just arbitrarily say, oh, we ought to have 15. Maybe that will become the number. So, but I know that bill proposes at this point 12, but it does not mean it's in concrete. And obviously, it's going to be, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. I wish we could take a magic wand and just say, oh, this is done. This is a marathon. So it probably will not happen within this year unless something miraculously occurs. But when people engage and vote in next year, in 2024, maybe the legislation can be presented and passed, and then in 2025, we may see a new court. Yeah. Okay.
And the average American does not know that we're operating now in tradition, not in legality. So that we do have the right, that this is just traditionally how many justices, but that's not a legal recourse.
I don't know that any of us can project speculatively what will happen. What I do know is when people stay engaged, ultimately you create victories. So we have to create the climate for anything to happen. Yesterday, as Justice Pearson, excuse me, Representative, I'm going to make you justice before it's over. As Representative Pearson stated, we always have to acknowledge a victory, but in the scheme, we've got a long way to go. That's right. I mean, some people, for some individuals, my dad's dream has been amazing. But for the masses of people, we're still struggling. We live in a nation where, in terms of income inequality, the average income of white families is almost $200,000 saved up. The average income of black families is less than $15,000. I was in Boston. In Boston, it is $225,000 and $8 for the average black family. Now, there's something wrong with that. Not that we're talking about giving somebody something. I mean, my dad, which most of you all, I'm not talking about you all here, but most of you all miss, he talked about a radical redistribution of wealth. He wasn't killed because he was talking about riding in the front of a bus or eating a hamburger. He was talking about structural, real change. And when you talk about distribution of wealth, which obviously maybe even those in Congress are against, it seems like. But if we really want to create a fair shake for everyone, you know, in this country, everybody, not some, but everybody should be able to have a decent home. A decent home could be the circumference of where we're standing. It doesn't have to be 5,000 square feet. That would be wonderful if you can. Everybody should have the best education. Everybody. Everybody should have health care. And everybody should have justice. Unfortunately, I'm not mad. I'm just passionate. Unfortunately, it's not. Well, we're angry, yes. Unfortunately, that is not the case yet. And that's, again, why Dad's dream partially is not fulfilled. Elements of the dream are done, and certainly a lot of individuals. You know, I think what we do is we look at examples of black wealth in athletics and entertainment. That's probably 10,000 people who are extraordinarily successful as it relates to wealth. But the masses, you know, we got to be concerned about our fellow human beings, brothers and sisters, who are, I mean, how do you justify in every city poverty and homelessness? And the fastest growing group of those in that area are women and children. What is wrong with us? And we have to examine all of ourselves. Not just one, it's not one person's, and I'm not talking about collective guilt, as my wife often says. I'm talking about collective responsibility. We have a responsibility to transform our society, to make it become what it ought to be. Not great again, because I don't know when that was. And many black folk don't know when it was great. I can't define it. It's an interesting slogan. But Dad talked about making America the nation that it ought to be for all of its children, every ethnic group, every person, every human. We are better than the behavior we're exhibiting. We're a better nation than we operate as. We must and can do better.
And we also are seeing attacks on everything that you're saying. Back again. There you go. That we also are seeing attacks on every one of those communities that my husband just mentioned. That's why we're here today. And again, not only, I mean, anti-Semitism is on the rise. You know, we're talking about you can't say gay in some places. You know, books are being taken out of schools. Women have fewer rights. We have fewer voting rights. You're not teaching history. And it's one thing to have a difference of opinion. But again, we are here today because we are witnessing oppression being legislated. It's becoming the law of the land.
Yes. Tequila now answer.
I'm sorry.
What do we do for young people to get involved in democracy?
We keep showing up and providing opportunities for the youth to get involved.
That's it. Second that. Anything else? Okay. Thank you all so much. Please give a round of applause to the King family. Thank you all for coming. And thank you so much.